Hello everyone, and welcome to Monster Mondays. For today's story, as I alluded to in the last episode, we're going to be covering Slenderman. Yeah, in the tail end of the last story, I might have made some sort of mention about Slenderman, whether it was just, now I remember. I'd mentioned Slenderman with the context of there was this cult of people that went around, well, not so much a cult of people, but rather just a group of adolescents that tried to sacrifice one of their best friends to the creature. And yeah, it was pretty messed up in every way. And so I thought, well, seems like as good a topical time as any to bring up what the heck this Slenderman actually is. And as a bonus, I've also included Slenderman versus Jeff the Killer to the story as well, since I've already covered Jeff the Killer. Without further ado, here we go. The Slenderman is an alleged paranormal figure purported to have been in existence for centuries, covering a large geographic area. Believers in the Slenderman ties appearance in with many other legends around the world, including Feardub, also known as Dark Man in Scotland, the Dutch Takken Man, also known as Branch Man, and the German legend Der Grobman or Der Grosse Man, the Tall Man. The story of Slenderman. After waking up with a jolt, the girl laid in bed a few seconds longer. Reaching over to switch on her bedside lamp, she tried to remember exactly what had stolen her sweet slumber away. When she couldn't, the brunette swung her legs over the side of the bed and heaved herself up. Checking the time on her phone, she snorted when she saw it was midnight, the witching hour. Knowing that sleep would only evade her, she left her bedroom for the kitchen, a good cup of coffee on her mind. As she passed by her front door, a chill spread like liquid fire down her spine. It's only winter, she told herself, focusing again on the coffee plan. Measuring out scoops of water and preparing her cup kept her occupied, but as the dark liquid boiled, she had nothing left to keep her mind from wandering off. The chill returned, and she couldn't help but glance behind her to the front door. It stood there innocently enough, just like always, the deadbolt still in place, and she could see nothing amiss with it. Turning back to her coffee, she did her best to forget about the feeling. With her cup in hand, she started back towards her bedroom. As she walked by the front door, she decided a quick glance at the peephole would help calm her restless mind. The chill worsened with each step she took towards the door and further away from the safety and warmth of her blankets. She pressed her empty hand against the cold metal door and took a deep breath before leading her eye to the peephole. At first she could only see an inky blackness, and somehow it seemed to swirl itself. When she blinked in surprise, the void melted away. She wished it hadn't. In its place there stood what she could only guess was once a man. The limbs were long and humanly awkward. With bulky joints branching off into several arms, not unlike the branches of a tree, the creature was draped in a black suit, somehow making the thing more nightmarish to her. The icing on the proverbial cake, however, was what passed as the hellish thing's face. It was as though her mind blurred the ghastly visage to spare itself further shock and horror. She shoved herself away from the door with a hand still pressed against it. The scalding mug of coffee fell, the liquid burning her bare legs as she fell backwards and tried to crawl away from the door. She knew somehow that her mind had been playing tricks on her. As she crab walked away from the door, she watched as tendrils as black as the void she first saw snake around through the cracks. The girl was trapped between the instinct to flee and the gut feeling not to turn her back on the door. When the door jolted, the urge to flee overcame her, and she slipped in the burning liquid as she tried to make it back to her room. She knew deep down she was trapping herself in a corner, but she had to get away from the door. The girl was halfway down the hallway when she heard the previously locked door creak open. She screamed and slipped into a wall, cracking her chin and stunning her. After that, there was only blackness. "Nicole?" a warm male voice snapped the woman out of her trance. She turned around. She was met by one of her sister's doctors. She nodded, not sure if she should say anything or if she could even find her voice, if she did have something to say. That morning she'd gotten an urgent phone call from the hospital saying her sister Lindsay was there. Before they'd even let her see her, the doctors had pulled her off to the side and insisted they talk to her about what might have happened. Phrases like self-inflicted and assault had been thrown around. Nicole felt her mind reel. She still hadn't fully understood what they'd been saying until she saw Lindsay with her own eyes. Her little sister had a bandage wrapped in her head, covering both of her ears as well as her eyes. The see it was to keep her now deadened eyes from drying out and to keep infection out of the wounds Lindsay had made to her ears. The doctors had guessed either she or something else had jammed a pencil into them to keep her off balance or to deafen herself against something. There was a mix of first and second degree burns on her hands, legs, and feet from what was assumed to be the coffee her neighbors found spilled all over the entry to her apartment. As Nicole walked to her sister's hospital room the first time, she thought she had spied the silhouette of a man in the window. She knew was impossible. Her sister's room was on the third story of the hospital. And I'm seeing a lot of pictures on this particular article. Rest assured, I'll link them below. The Slenderman appearance. The Slenderman is being male in appearance, who looks like a man with extremely long, slender arms and legs. He also appears to have 4 to 8 long black tentacles that protrude from his back through different photographs and enthusiasts. Though different photographs and enthusiasts disagree on this fact, it is therefore theorized he can contract these tentacles at will. He's described as wearing a black suit strikingly similar to the visage of the notorious Man in Black, as the name suggests. He appears very thin and is able to stretch his limbs and torso to inhuman lengths in order to induce fear and ensnare his prey. Once his arms are outstretched, his victims are put into something of a hypnotized state where they're utterly helpless to stop themselves from walking into them. He's also able to create tendrils from his fingers and back that he uses to walk in a similar fashion to Dr. Octopus. His superhuman stretching ability could also be seen as a similarity between himself and Mr. Fantastic. Whether he absorbs, kills, or merely takes his victims to an undisclosed location or dimension is also unknown, as there are never any bodies or evidence left behind in his wake to deduce a definite conclusion. His face is pale and slightly ghostly and almost appears to have been wrapped in some type of gauze or cloth. His facial features are also an object of debate. Many people believe that his face looks different to each person, if it is seen at all. It is sometimes portrayed he wears a hat, which is sometimes a bowler, a fedora, or a top hat. He may also be seen wearing a long flowing necktie or scarf, which is either red or gray. He often keeps his long, pale hands crossed politely behind his back or hanging loosely at his sides. His suit is black, sometimes portrayed as a pinstripe in artwork, a common misconception thanks to the very similar Jack Skellington from The Nightmare Before Christmas. He has long coattails which he lets float proudly. He wears long dress shoes which are always shined a perfect gleaming black. Behavior, much of the fascination with Slenderman is rooted in the overall aura of mystery that he is wrapped in. Despite the fact it is rumored he kills children almost exclusively, it is difficult to say whether his only objective is slaughter. Oftentimes it is either reported or recorded that he can be found in sections of woods, and those generally tend to be suburban. It's also been reported seen with large groups of children, as many photographs portray. It's commonly thought he resides in woods and forests and preys on children. He seems unconcerned with being exposed in the daylight or captured in photos. It is often thought as well he enjoys stalking people who become overly paranoid about his existence, purposely giving them glimpses of himself to in order to further frighten them. For this reason, it seems like Slenderman very much enjoys psychologically torturing his victims. He also often appears to float or drift rather than walk, which suggests the possibility of him being an ethereal being rather than a creature or a man. This would explain why he's able to remain mobile in spite of his poorly proportioned body. Slenderman, even though Slenderman was fabricated on something awful forms, or was he? Some people have claimed sightings. He's seen mostly at night peering into open windows and walks out in front of lone motorists on secluded roads. His main intentions appear to be kidnapping children, as when he is seen near them in photographs, they usually disappear shortly afterwards. Slenderman has also inspired many stories, such as those of marbled hornets. In the end, though, his purpose remains unknown. An interesting take on Slenderman by a pasta member who is relying on Marble Hornets series for evidence and facts. There's been a misconception about my pal, the Slenderman, due to the appearance of this article. He does not have hair or face. Everything else is correct. There's also some questioning as to whether or not there's more than one. I find it unlikely. It's most likely Slendy fucking with your head in order to make you think that there's more than one, which he has been known to do. As of now, Slendy has 3 or 4 known accomplices. These are Hoodie, Masky, the Rake, and possibly the Observer. Not much is known yet because the next episode of the Noah Maxwell ARG has not been fully released. In the Marble Hornets ARG, Hoodie and Masky are possibly his followers. In the Everyman Hybrids ARG, the Rake seems to be working with them, but we aren't really sure if that's true or not. And then we're treated to some pictures of historical references, Brazilian cave paintings that are supposed to portray something that I guess is him or something, but honestly it just looks like the same paintings you'd find anywhere. The earliest argued references to the legend is in the cave paintings found in Serra de Capivara National Park in the northeast of Brazil, which are believed to be dated as far back as 9000 BC. These paintings show a strangely elongated character leading a child by the hand, but make no reference to the extra appendages. Egyptian hieroglyphs. The next known possible reference to the Slenderman comes from 3100 BC in Lower Egypt, with references to the thief of the gods, or the thief of Kuk, becoming commonplace during the reign of the pharaoh Wasner. Hieroglyphic carvings representing the thief were found in the pharaoh's tomb, who was rumored to have some kind of encounter with the entity. The carvings resemble a strange figure with multiple upper limbs. One has never been found in any other hieroglyphic language. Renowned German woodcutter Hans Friedrich created at least 2 woodcuts featuring a character he described as Der Ritter, or the Knight, during the mid-16th century that were discovered in Holzberg Castle in 1883. Whilst Freckenberg was well known for his realistic depiction of human anatomy, something that was unusual among the woodcuts of the time. These pictures featured a skeletal, multi-limbed character. Historians are unsure of the exact symbolic nature of the character, with some claiming that it's a personification of religious wars that raged in Europe at the time. Others say it represents the mysterious plagues that have been believed to be the reason for the mysterious abandoning of the Hastelberg Castle in the nearby village in 1543. However, many insist that Freckenberg was attempting to represent Der Grubman, the tall man. According to the legend, he was a fairy who lived in the Black Forest. Bad children who crept into the woods at night would be relentlessly chased by Der Grubman, who wouldn't leave them until he either caught them or they were forced to tell their parents of their wrongdoings. Even then, there's a chilling account from an old journal dating from about 1702. My child, my Lars, he's gone, taken from his bed. The only thing we found was a scrap of black clothing. It feels like cotton, but is softer, thicker. Lars came into my bedroom yesterday screaming at the top of the lungs that the angel is outside. Asked him what he was talking about. Told me about some nonsense fairy story about Der Grobman. He said he went to the Great Spire village and found one of my cows dead hanging from a tree. I thought nothing of it at first, but now he's gone. We must find Lars, and my family must leave before we're killed. I'm sorry, my son. I should have listened. May God forgive me. Roman mythology. There's also a Roman fairy tale which tells the legend of the tall man, featuring this description which may have taken to refer to Slenderman. The tall man stood in a clearing dressed as a nobleman. All in black, shadows lay over him, dark as a cloudy midnight. He had many arms, all long and boneless as snakes, all as sharp as swords, and they writhed like worms on nails. He did not speak, but he made his intentions known. In the fairy tale, the tall man causes a mother to kill her husband and child before he slid from the fireplace and clenched her in his burning embrace. English mythology. There's also an English myth referring to the tree man, who's said to have a slim body with appendages that looks like tree branches. He is only known to be seen in the woods and was used as a story that parents told their children to thwart bad behavior. There have been quite a few disappearances of children that have been said to be linked to the tree man. Jeff the Killer versus Slenderman. The dark, wet alley was slightly illuminated by Sarah's cell phone light as she shined it every few seconds to see where she was headed. Her eyes scanned the darkness and she shook crazily. What had happened to her last night was a mystery. She thought back to the bar. She just came in with some friends, just a fun night out. Nothing could have happened, or so she thought. Now she was trembling, walking back to the building at 3 a.m. Again she thought back, but everything was a blur. She passed an old ratty motel and a pub. Sarah made her way to the outskirts of the town, skirts of her neighborhood, around a heavily wooded area. She walked, she clenched her eyes shut tight for moments at a time. She was huddled into her coat for warmth as the cold rain covered her for what seemed like an eternity. Just as her eyelids took cover of her eyes, something shined out to the corner of her vision. She instantaneously flashed her eyes open once again, and her pupils became wide. She looked around. Nothing stood out in the blackness and the rain. She spun around and continued her way back, hoping she would make it home. As she studied her surroundings, she remembered a shortcut she took as a kid when playing hide-and-seek with her childhood playmates. It involved climbing through the woods. The cold woman hesitated, came to the decision that anything that would get her to her warm home quicker was the better way. So headed towards the forest, she made her way in. First tree she laid eyes on had been marked, and what was marked on the tree mystified her. What looked like a circle with an X inside. She knew nothing of its origin or meaning, so she just assumed it was some kind of gang symbol or something of the sort. Making her way into the forest, she recalled the fun times she had as a kid. She thought to herself out loud, I miss those times, back when the world wasn't such a bit. Her voice trailed off. Sarah heard the loud crack of a tree branch off in the distance behind her. Terrified, she began running through the woods, and she soon became lost. She continued on anyway, hoping for a way out. Her lack of caution quickly resulted in her leg being caught on a near-lying root, and she fell to the ground. Attempting to get up caused her even more pain. She had twisted her ankle. Somebody, please help me, she called out. Crunching of leaves became present again. She attempted to stand up once again, but her injury kept her in place. She clenched her eyes shut out of fear, and she opened them again. A tall white man dressed in a suit stood before her. She became visually impaired at the sight of this man. She began screaming in terror, but she was soon silenced by the slender, pale man that stood before her in the dark. 4 o'clock. What was once a young boy now was a cold-blooded psychopath. Jeff the Killer had just finished what he called his daily rounds. Slaughtering of innocent people was almost all that flooded Jeff's mind. He dragged his feet up the wet cement as he entered what he called his home for years. Jeff stepped foot into a world of tragic memories. Clutching his 2 whiskey bottles in hand, Jeff had become a drunken killing machine. His brain was filled with the scent of murder. One thought that did cross his psychotic mind had been there since day one. As the rain hit the weary house, Jeff began to recall the night which he slaughtered his entire family. He chuckled at the thought. If it wasn't for his insanity, he might have thought about regret, remorse for taking the lives of people he once loved, but that wasn't possible at this point. Jeff was out for one thing and one thing only: death. 5:06 in the morning. He took another swig of his alcohol. The fuck am I sitting here for? Jeff buzzed. As he got up to make his way into the night, he swerved a bit and took another chug at his whiskey. Alcohol hit his warm and bloody lips, and he felt an odd sensation. An urge had hit him. He stood in the room gazing out at the forest beyond the house. Jeff checked his pockets, cigarettes, a lighter, and of course his knife. Jeff knew something wasn't right. The feeling he got was a mix of urge to kill again and something far different than what he had ever felt before. He stormed out of his home in the cold, wet night. Jeff was now in the dark street, his only light source being a lamp illuminating the road. The rain still pouring hit Jeff's back. He started to move into the direction of the forest. He struggled a bit. His alcohol consumption that night had been extremely high. The killer approached the desolate forest. Before he entered, he took a quick glare to his left. Jeff was not far from a cemetery. He trembled towards it. A thought blew into his mind almost like the wind on a breezy afternoon. The last piece of his family was only feet away and it beckoned him. He moved his feet away from the forest and towards the graveyard. Slowly, Jeff walked, yet he tripped a few times, spanning a short distance. He approached a grave. Jeff graced it with the rotten odor of death, his jacket covered in the blood and remains of his victims. Jeff simply gazed at the old slab of granite. His vision was too distorted to make out any sort of words. Because of this, he just sort of stood and stared. Jeff's insides began to feel uneasy and his throat became dry, the same feeling from just minutes before. Jeff stumbled back into the forest while trembling towards the woodland. His eyes wandered to a tree a few feet farther out than the others. It looked like a small grayish piece of paper could be seen hanging by a nail. His eyes blurry, he was unable to read it. He took no attempt either and crept into the darkness slowly, almost as if he recognized this place, as if it were his true home. Squeezing his 2 whiskey bottles, he studied the forest in a drunken haze. Jeff admired the darkness. It reminded him of a black hallway, one where the murderer could easily slash the necks of his victims without being seen. As he continued walking, Jeff became in a way infatuated. The empty blackness swirled around him. Muttering to himself in unrecognizable gibberish, he continued to trot. Something felt a bit odd. Crunching of the leaves seemed too loud to count for only one person. Jeff felt as if something was lurking beyond his line of sight. "Who's there?" Jeff growled. An abundance of noise could be heard, but nothing out of the ordinary. The chirps of crickets grew louder as Jeff studied his surroundings. "Come on, chicken, I don't really like games, and not hide and seek at all." As Jeff announced this, a quick rustling from a nearby bush could be heard. He slashed at it before the sound could come to a silence on its own. Jeff then saw what was hidden out of sight in the entire time. "Damn rats, you're just some good-for-nothing pests," Jeff proclaimed as a rodent scurried from the leaves. After he had seen what hid in the bush, he continued his midnight stroll. The rain crashing against his back came to a slow stop. His vision was becoming very blurry and a noise was growing within his head. What could be heard was just a figment of Jeff's insane imagination, for the woods were completely silent. He tampered around, dragging his feet and cursing at the sudden unbearable noise. Nothing like it had pierced his ears with such discontent before. The noise that drowned Jeff slowly became absent. From the pain, Jeff fell to a tree. Both bottles that were once clenched in his hands fell toward the ground. One crashed against the bark and shattered everywhere. The crack of glass had viciously dragged Jeff back into consciousness as his eyes readjusted to the darkness once more. The blurriness was magnified as Jeff saw a white oval-like object hovering above him. His eyes quickly focused from shock, but what had been in front of him a few seconds ago was nowhere to be found. What the fuck was that? Jeff chuckled his own remark. Was his mind playing tricks on him? Now I know that ain't no damn rats. He hastily came to the conclusion that something had to be lurking in the darkness, following him from a distance. That's it, I'm done playing games. Where the fuck are you, you bastard? Jeff screamed at the top of his lungs in hopes of some kind of response. He was answered abruptly as he started to walk again. He felt the slightest tingle in his neck. That's not the damn air, fucker. Get the hell out of the bushes before I decide to fuck you up. Jeff felt wild at this point. Nothing about this place was right, but he was enjoying every minute of it. Swiftly, he pulled a shining blade from the coat pocket and began slashing at trees in darkness. Come out, bitch, he cried out. No hiding now. I'll cut every last chip of bark to slit your throat. Jeff pointed his knife towards a tall, thin tree protruding from the left of his vision and stabbed. He was astonished to see that on the direct contact, the tree, or what he thought was a tree, faded away into darkness in a matter of milliseconds. Not knowing what to do, he glanced quickly to his right and stabbed at the black of night. He peered out in the wood and saw not what he expected. What stood before the psychotic boy was an extremely tall, thin man dressed in a clean black suit. This was all that Jeff could make out at the time. The rain caused Jeff's sight to be immensely distorted. Jeff's eyes had cleared again, and he quickly began to observe the man. He was emaciated, his face pale, almost pure white in color. As Jeff studied the face, he soon came to notice the lack of facial features on the man. This thing's face was completely empty. No eyes, nose, or mouth. Just a white, blank head that made Jeff feel a bit uneasy. And he soon broke out into a laugh. Jeff astounded. Jeff soon addressed the figure before him. So you were the bastard chasing me all through the woods, huh? Jeff stared at the blackness once more. I don't know what the fuck you are, but you kind of remind me of myself. You've got the nice white face, but all you're missing is the smile. Jeff began laughing uncontrollably at his own notion, yet he was stopped. Jeff's ears were assaulted by static, and he fell to the ground. He was shrouded in complete darkness as he clenched his ears for mercy. The figure Jeff had questioned earlier was now causing Jeff extreme pain, while the place where his eyes should have been were staring directly into Jeff's. At that point, Jeff snapped. He broke free of the pain, drew his knife once more, and began slashing. Each one of his moves were futile as the man moved around in no time at all, almost as if teleporting from place to place to avoid the attacks. The tall man began to fight back. Jeff had just now begun to notice the tendrils hanging from the back of his attacker. They grabbed at Jeff, and his response was to swing the knife at each one that came near him. Jeff managed to slice what seemed like to be an arm. In almost an instant, the limb grew back into place. What had just happened astonished Jeff. He felt it almost as if the man was a tall tree, and his tendrils simply branches. Jeff fled from the forest, knowing there was no way he'd be able to fight whatever his adversary truly was in what seemed to be his home territory. Jeff rushed from his attacker and found himself at the same place where he'd entered. To the right of him lay the cemetery, open space. As he ran past the trees, he noticed one that lay away from the others, the same tree from before. He ran to it out of instinct and read the note that he'd seen from a distance before. Do not enter these woods at night. A tall man has been spotted in the area recently. Some call him the Slenderman. Beware and enter at your own risk. Whatever that being that had stalked him in the woods before was referred to as Slenderman. The name fit perfect with the description of the tall white figure. Jeff hurried towards the graveyard where he waited for his foe, wielding a sharp bloody knife. Jeff's wish had been granted as the slender man approached from the woods. It seemed as if he was hesitant to leave its home court. Despite its hesitance, it left the area anyway and quickly rushed towards Jeff. The psychopath's instincts had started to come back, and he jumped towards the tall man. Jeff was quickly grabbed by his enemy and was thrown against a nearby tree. Jeff proceeded to swing again at the tendrils that grabbed him. He was able to slash at one of Slenderman's main arms. Blood oozed from the deep cut. The white figure showed no emotion and began snapping at Jeff once again. As he continued to smash Jeff against trees, the slabs of rock, Jeff's knife slipped from his grip and fell to the ground with Jeff. Colliding with the ground, Jeff's knife slid into his own stomach in a matter of seconds. Blood poured from the wound, and soon the ground was covered in a red liquid. He stood up with a jolt. Is that the best you got, Slendy? I've taken worse beatings from my father's belt than your weak twig arms. The Slenderman remained silent, continued fighting. The man reached for a piece of granite from a tombstone, but before he could take hold of it, Jeff jerked the knife from his gut and flung it directly at Slenderman. Jeff's accuracy was precise, and he sliced off one of the man's limbs. Slenderman's left arm was completely gone as it fell to the ground with a thud. It was quickly met by thick blood that barraged from his shoulder. It was completely drenched in blood. Slenderman briskly disappeared into the darkness, but illuminated behind Jeff. In his right hand, he held a broken piece of granite that proceeded to slam against the side of Jeff's head. Jeff fell to the ground once again, almost knocked unconscious. He was not left there for long before he was seized by his assailant and thrown against a grave. The stone exploded on impact with Jeff. Standing up once again, Jeff's eyes focused on the name on the grave. His eyes crossed the name on the grave. His black eyes widened. The words written across the grave slab were recognized by Jeff in an instant. It read out his brother's name, Lou. Something was coursing through Jeff. Rage filled him within an instant, and he lashed out at Slenderman in extreme speeds. Jeff's knife was slashing through his suit as well as pale skin. Slenderman began teleporting towards the forest. "Come out, bitch. I'm not finished with you yet," Jeff hollered. "I want to help you get to sleep, Randy. You look awfully tired." Whatever was flowing through Jeff caused his sanity to go into an overdrive state. He'd become delusional. He ran at Slenderman and back into the forest. He rushed through the woods, not observing his environment whatsoever. Jeff was deep in the forest, still pursuing the man. Slenderman continued warping around the forest. Jeff's lack of caution caused him to trip on a branch lying in his way. As he crashed into the ground, shards of glass pierced him, and as the contents of his pockets were thrown out, items scattered on the ground. As Jeff looked up with his mangled, bloody face, the scent of alcohol graced him. Jeff knew he had been here before. He had fallen out of this tree and dropped his bottle. Jeff desperately searched the ground for his knife. He felt his hand grab hold of something warm. What he had hoped was his blade. Jeff grabbed his leader, quickly scrapped at it, hoping the small flames would provide a source of light. His bloody hands covered the plastic in red liquid. After many desperate attempts, a small orange flame was produced. Jeff threw the leader out in front of him as he attempted to find his knife that lay close to him. Before he could make another movement, Slenderman appeared before him. The smooth white face that he had seen before was now covered in slashes of dark blood. Even though he looked hurt, Slenderman remained strong. Jeff's grip on the leader became loose. His blood caused friction between it and his hand. The small blaze dropped toward the ground. A tense flame scorched as the leader hit the ground. Both adversaries fled away from the flame before either of them could put distance between themselves and the flame. It was ignited by the alcohol that soiled the ground. In a matter of seconds, the forest was burning from the ground up. Jeff looked for safety, yet none was to be found in the flames. Slenderman thought nothing of this and continued to swing at Jeff. Jeff fought back, ignoring the orange and red covering his environment. The tall monster grabbed at Jeff. Jeff grabbed his knife and jumped. To no avail, Jeff was pulled by the Slenderman and was now stuck to his grip. Slenderman began to shake Jeff around. As he did this, Jeff bit at him. A loud crack of bone could be heard. Pain surged through Slenderman. Out of shock, he threw Jeff against a large tree. As Jeff flew towards the tree, a sharp pain hit Jeff straight in the back. It continued until he saw a large branch sliding through his torso, and he hit the base of a tree. Jeff had been viciously impaled by a long tree branch. Blood gushed from his mouth and open wounds as he screamed out in pain. Slenderman then fled. He warped to an area of safety where the forest had not been burned as of yet. He watched Jeff as he attempted to escape. At this point, Slenderman knew that escape was impossible. The white monster could hear Jeff screaming even from a large distance away. He continued to warp away from his territory and left Jeff to burn in the flames. The blaze became brighter and surrounded Jeff. Struggling to avoid the intense heat, he violently slid his body from the tree. Fire engulfed Jeff. Everything swirled around him and became wrapped up into the flames. There was no hope for Jeff. He'd lost his mind long ago, yet this was something different. He'd reached his limit. His state of mind burned just like the forest did. A young girl by the name of Sarah Burgess had been reported missing. She was last seen at Drop-In Bar Grill at around 9 o'clock p.m. Do you have any idea the whereabouts of Sarah Burgess? Bourgeoisie or something? Please call the station at 404-835-HELP, in parentheses 4357. In other news, a major forest fire has broken out in the local area and the cause has not been discovered. Investigators are studying the remnants of the forest. The fire has been extinguished. This will hurt much of the animal life found in the once heavily wooded forest. We'll bring more on this story as it comes. Mark turned off the television and slumped into his couch cushion. Hey honey, you want to go take a look at the forest? Well, what's left of it? They put out the fire that burned the damn thing to the ground. There's also a girl missing. Maybe we'll see her while we're out there. Can we do it some other time? I'm kind of busy right now, Mark. If the police can't find the girl, there's no way in hell we can, Julia protested. Mark argued, come on, it won't hurt nothing. It won't be more than a 5-minute walk. Alright, I guess, but 5 minutes only. The man put on his shoes and left his house with his wife. As they strolled towards the burnt-out forest, they could see something moving in the opposite direction. It looked somewhat human. As they moved closer towards it, they saw what looked like severe burns to its face. The creature's eyelids were completely gone, and it carried an unnatural smile across its face. It was completely white with hints of gray where it looked like it had been burned. Its long black hair was singed. They came closer towards it, and Mark shouted, "Hey buddy, you need some help?" Mark bellowed. Mark, stop. We don't even know who he is. He could be a fucking killer for all we know. Julia whispered, frightened. The man moved swiftly towards the couple. As he approached them, he drew a thick blade covered in red liquid. I don't, but I can tell you need some help to sleep. Jeff slashed the knife across the man's neck as he fell to the ground. His wife began to scream loudly, but was unable to continue as she was next. She was stabbed directly in the heart with the knife. You don't need to worry about me. Just go to sleep. Credit to Dylan R., custom creepypasta. And that was Monster Mondays for today. I thank you for tuning in, and hopefully you found that enjoyable in some way. All sources are in the description below, and have a lovely night. And remember, Mom's not here, kids.